I'm Olivia, 27, lying in an ICU bed with monitors tracking my failing organs. My lupus flare-up had turned deadly overnight. Through my fever, I heard the doctor's grave warning to my parents. Tonight might be her last. Their response shattered what remained of my heart. We can't miss Matthew's engagement party. They left me fighting for my life alone. The letter I wrote afterward changed everything between us forever. Before I tell you how I survived that night and what my letter said, let me know where you're watching from in the comments and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible to the people who should love you most. Growing up in suburban Boston, I had all the material comforts a child could want. Our two-story colonial had 4 bedrooms, a manicured lawn, and a swing set my father Richard assembled one summer afternoon. My mother Diana kept family photos throughout the house, mostly featuring my older brother Matthew. Looking back, those photos told the truth I couldn't see. In nearly every image, Matthew stood center frame while I hovered at the edges, as if the photographer couldn't quite fit me in the family portrait. From the moment Matthew was born, 3 years before me, he became the center of my parents' universe. He excelled at everything: captain of the baseball team, straight-A student, most likely to succeed in his yearbook. My parents attended every game, every academic ceremony, their faces glowing with pride as they cheered from the stands. I wasn't jealous of Matthew himself. He was just living his life, excelling in ways that came naturally to him. What hurt was how visibly my parents prioritized him at every turn. When Matthew won his regional baseball tournament at 14, my parents threw a backyard party with balloons and catered food. When I won first place in a statewide art competition that same year, my mother stuck the certificate on the refrigerator with a magnet and said, "That's nice, honey," before asking if I'd finished my math homework. The pattern continued through high school. My high school graduation fell on the same weekend as Matthew's baseball tournament 3 states away. I walked across the stage to receive my diploma, scanning the audience for faces that weren't there. My grandparents attended, taking photos and bringing me flowers, but the 2 empty seats they'd saved remained vacant. That night, my phone buzzed with a text. "Sorry we missed it. Matthew's team made the finals. So proud of him. We'll celebrate when we get back." When I received a prestigious art scholarship to Rhode Island School of Design, the news came the same week Matthew was accepted to Yale. My parents hosted a dinner party for Matthew, inviting extended family and neighbors to toast his success. My scholarship earned a brief mention during dessert, almost as an afterthought. The summer I turned 16, we had planned a family vacation to the beach, our tradition since I was small. 2 weeks before departure, Matthew received an offer for a summer internship at a law firm. My parents canceled our vacation so they could drive him to Connecticut and help him find an apartment. I spent that summer alone at home, working extra shifts at the local coffee shop. When I was 19 and in my sophomore year of college, I began experiencing strange symptoms: extreme fatigue, joint pain, and unexplained fevers. After multiple doctor visits and tests, I received my diagnosis: lupus, an autoimmune disease that would require lifelong management. When I called my parents, my mother said, "Are you sure it's not just stress? You've always been sensitive." My father added, "Maybe you're studying too hard or not eating right." Their dismissal of my diagnosis as dramatics hurt more than the illness itself. As my symptoms fluctuated over the years, they would often suggest I was exaggerating when I canceled plans due to flare-ups. "Matthew works 60-hour weeks and never complains," became their refrain. After college, I moved to Chicago, partly for a job opportunity in graphic design, but mostly for the distance from my family. The city offered anonymity and the chance to build an identity separate from being Matthew's little sister. I found an apartment with a roommate named Jessie, who quickly became the closest thing to family I'd known. Jessie noticed things about me that my own parents never had: when I was pushing myself too hard, when my symptoms were flaring, when I needed space or company. She learned about lupus, researching on her own time and keeping track of my medications without me asking. "That's what friends do," she'd say when I thanked her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to care for someone. Despite the distance, I maintained weekly calls with my parents, hoping that adulthood might somehow reshape our relationship. Yet each call followed the same pattern: brief questions about my life followed by extended updates on Matthew's latest achievements. His law career, his new condo, his perfect girlfriend Vanessa. I would hang up feeling like a stranger to my own family, an acquaintance they checked in with out of obligation. My career in graphic design was thriving despite my health challenges. I'd recently been promoted to senior designer at my firm after a campaign I led won an industry award. When I shared the news with my parents, my father said, "That's great, honey," before immediately asking if I'd heard that Matthew had just won his first major case. The award certificate joined others in a drawer I rarely opened. Through it all, I kept trying. I sent thoughtful birthday gifts, remembered anniversaries, asked questions about their lives. I flew home for Christmas and Thanksgiving, sitting at the family table while conversation swirled around Matthew's accomplishments. I showed up believing that eventually, they might see me too. If I achieved enough, cared enough, persisted enough, perhaps I could earn the love that should have been freely given. Looking back, I realize I was trying to solve a problem that wasn't mine to fix. No accomplishment would ever be enough because the issue wasn't my worth. It was their inability to distribute their attention and affection equally between their children. But understanding that intellectually didn't stop me from trying, again and again, to earn a place at the center of a family photo. The morning my life changed forever began like any other Tuesday. I woke with the familiar ache in my joints that signaled a minor lupus flare, uncomfortable but manageable. I took my medications with breakfast and prepared for a day of working from home. By noon, however, something felt different. The ache had intensified to searing pain, and a fever had begun climbing steadily. Each breath became a conscious effort, as if my lungs had forgotten how to perform their basic function. I texted my parents, having a bad flare-up. Fever 102 and struggling to breathe. Might need to go to hospital. 20 minutes later, my mother responded, "Take some Tylenol and rest. You'll be fine by morning." My father added, "Remember when Matthew had pneumonia during finals week? He still aced all his exams. Mind over matter, kiddo." As afternoon faded into evening, my condition deteriorated rapidly. The fever climbed to 104 degrees. My vision blurred, and the 12 steps to the bathroom seemed an impossible journey. I tried calling Jessie, but she was on a work trip to Detroit for the week. The last text I managed to send her before my phone slipped from my sweaty grip was, "Not good. Really sick." It wasn't eloquent, but it was all I could manage as consciousness began to slip away. Hours or minutes later, I couldn't tell which, I heard the distant sound of keys in the lock. Jessie's voice called my name, then grew urgent. Her Detroit meeting had ended early, a stroke of timing that likely saved my life. I felt her cool hand on my burning forehead, heard her gasp, and then the blur of her calling 911. Her voice seemed to come from underwater as she described my symptoms to the dispatcher. "She has lupus. Yes, autoimmune. Temperature is, oh God, it's 105.3. Barely conscious. Hurry, please hurry." The ambulance ride exists in my memory as fragmentary sensations. The wail of sirens, the jolt of the stretcher being loaded, the bright lights overhead, oxygen mask on my face, and Jessie's hand gripping mine as she rattled off my medical history to the paramedics. The emergency room was chaos, doctors shouting orders, nurses inserting IVs, machines beeping urgent warnings. Blood drawn, scans taken, antibiotics pushed through my veins. Words floated above me: sepsis, multi-organ involvement, autoimmune crisis. I understood enough to be terrified but lacked the strength to express it. After the initial frenzy, I was admitted to a regular hospital room. Jessie called my parents, her voice tight with controlled anger as she explained the severity of my condition. They arrived the following afternoon, having finished their workdays before making the 30-minute drive to the hospital. "You gave us quite a scare," my mother said, settling into the visitor's chair while checking her phone. My father stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets, glancing periodically at the baseball game playing on the room's small television. Within minutes, the conversation turned to Matthew's surprise engagement to Vanessa. The party was happening in 3 days at an upscale restaurant downtown. My mother scrolled through her phone, showing me venue photos and discussing menu options while machines tracked my vital signs beside her. "It's going to be the event of the season," she gushed. "Everyone will be there. The Sullivans, the Hamiltons, all Matthew's law firm partners." My father checked his watch after 30 minutes. "We should get going, Diana. We've got that meeting with the caterer at 6. They left with casual waves, promising to check in tomorrow. No questions about my prognosis, no discussions with my doctors, no understanding of how close I'd come to dying just hours before. Over the next 48 hours, my condition worsened despite aggressive treatment. The fever refused to break, and blood tests showed my kidney function declining. The pain intensified until every breath felt like inhaling glass. Jessie visited daily, bringing my favorite moisturizer, a soft blanket from home, and genuine concern. She asked questions the doctors couldn't answer, held my hand when the pain peaked, and never glanced at her phone once during her visits. "Your parents called," she mentioned during one visit, her expression carefully neutral. "They wanted to know if you'd need a ride home from the hospital for Matthew's party." I turned my face to the wall, unable to form a response through the hurt. Linda, my night nurse, noticed the infrequent family visits and became quietly protective. She'd bring extra Jell-O cups, adjust my pillows with gentle hands, and talk to me during long, painful nights when sleep wouldn't come. "Your friend Jessie, she's a good one," Linda observed while checking my for. "Known her long?" 3 years, I managed through cracked lips. "Better sister than my actual family." Linda nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Family's who shows up, honey. Some people never learn that." On my 3rd hospital night, my oxygen levels began dropping dangerously. My temperature spiked to 106 and my blood pressure plummeted. Linda called the doctor, her movements efficient, but her eyes betraying her concern. After examining me, Dr. Wilson ordered my immediate transfer to the intensive care unit. As orderlies prepared to move me, I asked Linda to call my parents. Surely, an ICU transfer would make them understand the severity of my condition. Surely now they would come and stay. The desperate hope of a child seeking parental comfort persisted, despite 27 years of evidence to the contrary. "Of course I'll call them, honey," Linda promised, squeezing my hand. "Try to rest now." The ICU was quieter than the regular floor, the monitoring more intensive. Each patient room was visible from the central nurses' station, and the staff-to-patient ratio meant never being alone for long. Yet, as machines tracked my failing body's efforts to survive, the emotional isolation had never been more acute. I waited for my parents, watching the door with each sound in the hallway, hoping that this time, when it truly mattered, they would finally put me first. Dr. Wilson, a tall woman with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes, arrived the next morning with my charts. After examining me thoroughly, her expression grew serious. She stepped out, and through the glass walls of my ICU room, I watched her greet my parents who had just arrived. She guided them to a small consultation room across from the nurses' station. Though I couldn't hear them, the gravity in her body language told me everything. Nurse Linda, checking my vitals, noticed my attention fixed on the meeting. "Would you like me to leave the door open so you can hear?" she asked quietly. I nodded, grateful for her understanding. Dr. Wilson's voice carried clearly through the open door. "Mr. and Mrs. Wallace, Olivia's condition has deteriorated significantly overnight. The lupus flare has triggered what we call a cytokine storm, causing inflammation throughout her body. Her kidneys are showing signs of acute injury, her liver enzymes are elevated, and her respiratory function is compromised. My mother's voice higher than usual, but she'll recover, right? She's always been sensitive, but she bounces back. I need to be frank with you, Dr. Wilson continued, her tone measured but urgent. We're doing everything medically possible, but tonight is critical. Her body is fighting on multiple fronts. She might not make it until morning. The silence that followed seemed to stretch endlessly. I imagined my parents' faces, trying to process the doctor's words, finally understanding the severity that they'd dismissed for days. Then, the unmistakable sound of a ringtone broke the silence. My father's voice. Sorry, doctor. It's Matthew. I should take this. I strained to hear, each word like a dagger to my already failing heart. Hey, son. Yes, we're at the hospital. No, we'll definitely still be there. The restaurant needs final numbers by noon? I'll call them right after this. My mother's voice cut in after my father finished the call. Dr. Wilson, we understand this is serious, but tonight is Matthew's engagement party. We've been planning it for months. Everyone will be there. Perhaps we could take shifts, my father suggested. I could come to the hospital while Diana attends the first half, then switch. Richard, that won't work, my mother countered. What will people think if we're both not present for the whole event? Matthew is our son too, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. Mrs. Wallace, Dr. Wilson's voice took on an edge I hadn't heard before. Perhaps I haven't made myself clear. Your daughter is critically ill. Multiple organ systems are failing. We are doing everything we can, but there is a very real possibility that she will not survive the night. We understand, my father replied, his tone the same one he used when negotiating business deals. We'll stop by the hospital after the party. It shouldn't run too late, maybe 11 or so. And we'll keep our phones on vibrate, my mother added, as if this represented a significant concession. I couldn't see Dr. Wilson's face, but the lengthy pause suggested she was struggling to maintain her professional composure. I see, she finally said. I'll note your decision in Olivia's chart. The consultation room door opened, and my parents appeared in the hallway. Dr. Wilson walked away stiffly, her shoulders tense. My parents approached my room, their expressions composed into careful concern that didn't reach their eyes. Hey, sweetheart, my mother said, standing at the foot of my bed rather than coming to my side. The doctor says you're having a rough time, but you'll pull through. You always do. We need to head out soon to finish the party preparations, my father added, checking his watch. Matthew's big day, you know. The party only happens once, my mother continued, adjusting her designer handbag on her shoulder. But you'll be fine. The doctors are probably just being cautious. Matthew and Vanessa would be so disappointed if we weren't there the whole time, my father explained, as if I hadn't heard their entire conversation. We're hosting, after all. We'll keep our phones on vibrate, my mother repeated, already edging toward the door. Call if anything changes. I couldn't speak. The pain of their betrayal eclipsed even the physical agony coursing through my body. Silent tears tracked down my face as they left with casual waves, their steps quickening as they reached the elevator, as if eager to escape the inconvenient reality of their daughter's mortality. Nurse Linda entered after they'd gone, her face carefully blank as she checked my monitors. But when she saw my tears, her professional mask slipped. I'm so sorry, honey, she whispered, squeezing my hand. That's not right. Not right at all. I turned my face away, unable to respond through the sobs that racked my inflamed lungs. Each cry sent daggers of pain through my chest, but the physical hurt paled compared to the gaping wound their abandonment had left. Jessie arrived after work, her face flushed from rushing. She took one look at me and knew something was terribly wrong beyond my physical condition. When I managed to tell her between labored breaths what had happened, her expression transformed from concern to pure rage. They what? She demanded, her voice rising until Linda gently shushed her, reminding her of ICU protocols. They're choosing a party over being with you tonight? After what the doctor told them. I nodded weakly. That's it, Jessie declared, pulling a chair right up to my bedside and taking my hand. I'm not leaving. Not for a minute. My boss can fire me if he wants to, but I'm staying right here all night. True to her word, Jessie remained as my condition deteriorated further. The night became a blur of medical interventions, each hour bringing a new crisis. My temperature spiked to dangerous levels, causing hallucinations that merged with moments of clarity. Doctors were called repeatedly as my oxygen levels dropped. Medications were adjusted, additional IVs inserted, cooling blankets applied and removed as my body cycled between burning fever and chilling shivers. Through it all, Jessie held my hand, wiped my forehead, and advocated fiercely when I couldn't speak for myself. Unlike my parents, she never looked at her phone, never mentioned other obligations, never made me feel like my crisis was an inconvenience. During one moment of clarity in the pre-dawn hours, as machines beeped urgently around us and medical staff worked to stabilize yet another crisis, a thought crystallized with perfect clarity. I had spent my entire life seeking love and approval from people fundamentally incapable of giving it. I had been dying inside long before my organs began to fail, dying from the constant striving for recognition that never came, from bending myself into shapes that might finally be seen. Jessie, I whispered during a brief moment when we were alone, my voice barely audible above the machines. I'm here, she responded immediately, leaning close. If I make it through this, I managed between labored breaths, everything changes. She squeezed my hand. You will. And it will. As dawn broke through the ICU windows, something shifted, not just in my resolve, but in my body. The fever that had raged for days began to recede. My oxygen levels stabilized. The crushing pain in my chest eased fractionally. The medical team, who had been fighting alongside me all night, noted the improvements with cautious optimism. She's turning a corner, I heard someone say, their voice carrying the weariness of a night-long battle. I wouldn't have bet on it 6 hours ago, but she's fighting back. My last thought before exhaustion claimed me was that I was indeed fighting back, not just against the disease ravaging my body, but against the patterns that had ravaged my spirit for 27 years. I awoke to sunlight streaming through the ICU windows and the unfamiliar sensation of slightly less pain. Dr. Wilson stood at the foot of my bed, reviewing my charts with an expression of surprise and relief. You're quite the fighter, Olivia, she said when she noticed my open eyes. Your labs are showing improvement across the board. Not out of the woods yet, but heading in the right direction. Jessie was asleep in the visitor's chair, her body contorted uncomfortably, still wearing yesterday's work clothes. Her hand remained outstretched toward the bed, as if she'd been holding mine even in sleep. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, though the movement sent pain shooting through my arm. No missed calls. No texts from my parents asking how their critically ill daughter had fared through the night they'd chosen to miss. A notification flashed on my screen, a social media alert. Someone had tagged my parents in photos from Matthew's engagement party. My thumb hovered over the notification, a lifetime of self-destructive curiosity warring with my new resolution. Curiosity 1. The images loaded slowly on the hospital's weak Wi-Fi, my parents raising champagne glasses in a toast, their faces glowing with pride and joy. My mother in her favorite blue cocktail dress, my father in his best suit. More photos followed, them laughing with family friends, hugging Matthew and his fiancée Vanessa, cutting an elaborate cake. In every image, they beamed with unrestrained happiness, not a shadow of worry for their daughter fighting for her life just 20 minutes away. I set the phone down as Jessie stirred and opened her eyes. Hey, she said, immediately alert despite her obvious exhaustion. How are you feeling? Like I've been hit by a truck, but apparently I'm improving, I replied, my voice raspy from the oxygen mask I'd worn through the night. Jessie poured a small cup of water and helped me sip it. "You scared me half to death last night," she admitted. "There were a couple times when I thought." She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "But you stayed," I said. "Of course I stayed. Where else would I be?" The simplicity of her response brought fresh tears to my eyes. Of course she stayed. Just as, in my parents' worldview, of course they attended the party. Our priorities reveal our truths. "They never called," I said quietly. "Not once all night." Jessie's expression darkened. "I know. I kept checking your phone, thinking maybe they'd at least text to check in." "I saw the party photos," I admitted. "They look like they didn't have a care in the world." Jessie took my hand carefully, mindful of the four. "Liv, can I say something that might be hard to hear?" I nodded. "This isn't normal. This isn't what family does." I mean, even if they'd gone to the party for an hour to make an appearance and then come back, that would still be pretty awful given what the doctor told them. But to not even call? To spend the whole night celebrating while you were fighting for your life? She shook her head. "That's not love. That's not even basic human decency." Her words hurt, but like the pain of setting a broken bone, necessary for proper healing. Nurse Linda came in to check my vitals, her expression softening when she saw I was awake. "There's our fighter," she said warmly. "You gave us quite a battle last night, but you're looking better this morning." As she checked my IVs and recorded measurements, she asked casually, "Any word from your parents this morning?" "No," I replied. "They're probably sleeping in after the party." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line as she adjusted my medication drip. After ensuring we were alone, she perched on the edge of my bed. "Olivia, I don't usually get this personal with patients, but I want to tell you something. 20 years ago, I was diagnosed with breast cancer at 32. My husband at the time decided a golf tournament was more important than my first chemo session." She smoothed my blanket with practiced hands. "He's my ex-husband now, and it was the best decision I ever made. Sometimes it takes a health crisis to show us who truly deserves a place in our lives." She patted my hand and stood. "Just something to think about. Now, can I get you anything for pain?" After Linda left, Jessie and I talked for hours. Real, honest conversation about the pattern of emotional neglect that had defined my relationship with my parents. Each memory I shared seemed to strengthen my resolve. The missed graduation, the canceled vacation, the constant comparisons to Matthew, the dismissal of my illness as dramatics. "I've been trying to earn their love my entire life," I realized aloud. Every achievement, every accomplishment, it was all just another attempt to be seen. To be valued the way they value Matthew. "You shouldn't have to earn love from your parents, Liv," Jessie said softly. "It should be freely given." As the medication cleared my head and the fever receded further, I found myself thinking with unexpected clarity. The near-death experience had burned away the fog of denial I'd lived in for years. I could see now that nothing would change unless I changed it. My parents would continue their pattern of emotional neglect as long as I continued to accept it. "I can't do this anymore," I said finally. "I can't keep hoping they'll suddenly become different people. I can't keep letting them break my heart." Jessie nodded. "So, what do you want to do?" "I need space to heal, physically and emotionally. I can't go back to my apartment alone in this condition, but I also can't bear the thought of them suddenly playing concerned parents now that the party's over." "Stay with me," Jessie offered immediately. "The spare room is small, but it's yours for as long as you need it. Al and I can take shifts helping until you're back on your feet." Al was Jessie's boyfriend of 2 years, a kind, quiet graphic designer who had always treated me with the easy acceptance of extended family. "Are you sure?" "I'd be a lot to handle right now." "Positive," Jessie said firmly. Al already offered when I called him last night. The decision crystallized. I would recover elsewhere, without my parents' performance of concern when it suited their schedule. But first, I needed to make my position clear. "Can you bring me my laptop? I need to email work about taking medical leave." Jessie retrieved my laptop from my bag. While she stepped out to find coffee, I opened a blank document and began to write, not to my workplace, but to my family. The words flowed with surprising ease, as if they'd been waiting years to be written. The letter wasn't angry. Anger required energy I didn't have. Instead, it was clear and final, acknowledging the lifelong pattern that had culminated in last night's ultimate betrayal. I explained my decision to recover elsewhere and set terms for any future contact. It wasn't a door slammed shut forever, but a boundary firmly established. I would no longer accept scraps of attention when convenient for them. I would no longer make myself small to fit their narrative. By afternoon, my medical improvement was significant enough that Dr. Wilson discussed the possibility of discharge with intensive home care in a few days. Normally, we'd want family present for discharge planning, she began hesitantly. My roommate Jessie will be caring for me, I interrupted. She's already arranged to work remotely for the next 2 weeks. Dr. Wilson's expression revealed her understanding. I see. Well, we'll need to review medication schedules, warning signs to watch for, and follow-up appointments. She seems very capable. She is, I confirmed. More than capable. Linda returned for her shift that evening and helped arrange the details of my discharge against standard hospital recommendations. Her quiet support and subtle manipulation of the system on my behalf was yet another act of genuine care that highlighted the absence of the same from my own family. Your parents called the desk, she mentioned while helping me sit up to eat dinner. They said they'd be by this evening after they recovered from last night's festivities. The casual cruelty of their phrasing, recovered from festivities while I recovered from near death, cemented my decision. Linda, can you help me get out of here before they arrive? She studied my face, then nodded slowly. Let me see what I can do. The sun had already set when my parents finally arrived at the hospital, nearly 24 hours after leaving me at what could have been my deathbed. My mother carried a small potted plant from the hospital gift shop, the price tag still attached to its generic blue foil wrapper. My father checked emails on his phone as they walked. To my surprise, Matthew accompanied them, his expression bored and slightly annoyed, still wearing the dress shirt and slacks from the previous night's celebration. Through the ICU security cameras that Linda had pulled up on the nurse's station monitor, I watched their approach from the wheelchair I now sat in, discharge papers signed, belongings packed, Jessie waiting with her car at the service entrance. They just got off the elevator, Linda reported, her voice carefully professional but her eyes conveying understanding. Ready? I nodded, suddenly grateful for the hospital gown and robe that covered the trembling in my limbs, not from fear, but from the enormity of the step I was taking. On the monitor, I watched my family approach my room. My mother entered first, her practiced smile faltering as she registered the empty bed, neatly made, all personal items gone. My father followed, brow furrowing in confusion. Matthew lingered in the doorway, scrolling through his phone. There must be a mistake, I heard my mother say to no one in particular. This was Olivia's room. My father stepped into the hallway, looking for a nurse. Excuse me, has my daughter been moved to another room? Olivia Wallace. Linda gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze before stepping out from behind the nurse's station to intercept them. I could see her transformation from the warm, compassionate woman who had helped me all night into a model of clinical professionalism. Mr. and Mrs. Wallace? She confirmed, her voice carrying to the security monitor's microphone. Yes, we're looking for our daughter Olivia. She was in this room yesterday. Ms. Wallace requested discharge against medical advice, Linda stated, her tone neutral but her posture rigid. The paperwork was completed approximately 40 minutes ago. Discharge, my mother repeated incredulously. But she was in the ICU. She was critical. That's completely irresponsible, my father added, his voice rising. Where is she? Where her parents? We have a right to know. Ms. Wallace is an adult and has privacy rights under HIPAA, Linda replied smoothly. She left specific instructions regarding her information. However, she did leave something for you. She gestured to the bedside table where my sealed letter lay. My mother snatched it up, tearing open the envelope with manicured nails. My father leaned over her shoulder to read along. Matthew, finally looking up from his phone, sighed dramatically. Can we go now? Vanessa's waiting for brunch, and I have that tennis game at 2. Neither parent responded, their faces transforming as they read my words. My mother's complexion, always carefully maintained with expensive creams, drained of color. My father's perpetual expression of mild impatience gave way to something I'd rarely seen, genuine shock, followed by the first glimmer of shame. What does it say? Matthew demanded, reaching for the letter. My father pulled it away, suddenly protective of the words that laid bare their failure. Not now, Matthew. Linda, who had maintained her professional distance, broke character slightly. Ms. Wallace experienced multiple code situations last night. We nearly lost her twice. This blunt medical assessment, delivered in Linda's now cold voice, seemed to finally penetrate. My mother swayed slightly, reaching for the empty bed for support. But she was stable when we left, she whispered, as if this justified their absence. No, Mrs. Wallace, Linda corrected, years of contained anger toward neglectful families evident in her tone. She was critical when you left. Dr. Wilson informed you both that your daughter might not survive the night. You chose to attend a party instead. Matthew's attention was fully engaged now, his phone forgotten in his hand. Wait, the doctors told you Olivia might die last night, and you still came to my party? It wasn't like that, my father began defensively. The doctors always exaggerate to cover themselves legally. And Olivia has always been dramatic about her health. From behind the nurse's station, I watched a nearby medical resident turn away in disgust at my father's words. Linda's professional mask slipped further. Your daughter suffered respiratory failure at 2 a.m., she stated flatly. Her friend Jessie signed the consent forms for emergency intervention since you were unreachable. Your phones went straight to voicemail. Both of them. The security camera captured my parents' dawning horror as the reality of their actions, and their consequences, finally registered. My mother began frantically dialing my number, which went directly to voicemail since I'd already blocked their numbers. My father demanded my home address from Linda, who simply repeated the HIPAA regulations regarding patient privacy. As they argued with hospital staff, growing increasingly desperate, I could see the hospital personnel's collectively cold treatment. Word had spread among the ICU staff about the parents who chose a party over their critically ill daughter. I caught snippets of whispered conversations as nurses passed each other. Those are the ones who chose a party. Can you imagine leaving your child like that? The friends stayed all night while they were out celebrating. After exhausting their options at the hospital, my parents left in a rush, presumably to drive to my apartment. They wouldn't find me there either. Jessie had already collected my essential medications and clothing the previous day. My apartment stood empty, a physical manifestation of the emotional vacancy I'd lived with for years. I watched on the monitor as they huddled in the parking lot, my father making calls, likely to my workplace, though they would only confirm I was on medical leave without providing details. Matthew stood apart, his expression unreadable from the camera's angle, but his body language suggesting the first recognition that something was profoundly wrong with the family dynamic he'd benefited from his entire life. Ready to go, honey? Linda asked, returning to the nurse's station. I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of what I'd just witnessed and done. For what it's worth, she said quietly as she wheeled me toward the service elevator, I think you're making the right choice. Healing isn't just physical. As Jessie helped me into her car minutes later, my phone began lighting up with calls from numbers I didn't recognize, likely my parents using different phones to try to reach me. I turned it off completely, sinking into the passenger seat with the bone-deep weariness of someone who had fought 2 battles simultaneously, one against disease and one for self-preservation. "Let's go home," Jesse said, squeezing my hand gently before putting the car in drive. Home. Not the apartment I'd been living in, and certainly not the house I grew up in. Home was now defined by the presence of people who showed up when it mattered most. As we drove away from the hospital, I felt the weight of decades of striving for approval lifting from my shoulders, replaced by the unfamiliar lightness of choosing my own worth. The first week in Jesse's spare room passed in a blur of medications, sleep, and the basic tasks of healing. My body, pushed beyond its limits by the lupus flare and subsequent organ stress, demanded rest above all else. Jesse and Al created a schedule between them, ensuring someone was always home with me. They administered medications on time, helped me to the bathroom when walking was too difficult, and kept careful logs of my symptoms and improvements as the hospital had instructed. Their matter-of-fact caregiving stood in stark contrast to my parents' lifelong dismissal of my illness. When pain woke me at night, Jesse appeared with medication and water without complaint. When fever returned briefly, Al drove at midnight to find an open pharmacy for the prescribed antipyretics. No one suggested I was exaggerating or being dramatic. My suffering was acknowledged, my needs attended to without question. My phone, when I finally turned it back on, contained 67 missed calls and 39 text messages from my parents. I scrolled through them without opening any, watching the progression from angry demands, "Call us immediately. This behavior is unacceptable," to desperate pleas just let us know you're alive. We're worried sick. The irony of that last phrase wasn't lost on me. Worried sick now, when it was too late, but not when I actually was sick and their presence might have mattered. Matthew had sent a single text, "Mom and Dad are freaking out. Just call them so they'll stop bothering me about it." I deleted them all and blocked each number, then turned my attention to the messages from people who had actually shown up for me. My team at work had arranged a meal delivery service for my recovery. My neighbor from across the hall had walked Jesse through my apartment to collect additional belongings I needed. Friends I hadn't seen in months due to work obligations sent flowers, books, and gentle inquiries about how they could help. The contrast was illuminating. I had built a community of care around myself without realizing it, people who chose to support me not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. While recovering physically, I began to recognize the value of these chosen relationships in a way I never had while chasing the approval of family who withheld it. Physical recovery progressed slowly. The weekly nurse visits showed gradual improvement in my vital signs and blood work, though each step forward sometimes included small steps back. A bad day would follow 3 good ones. Fatigue lingered like an unwelcome houseguest. My body required patience I was only beginning to learn to give it. 3 weeks after leaving the hospital, I began therapy sessions via video call, unable yet to travel to an office. Dr. Meredith Chin specialized in chronic illness and family trauma, a combination I didn't realize was common enough to create a specialty until I began researching therapists. "Tell me about your family," Dr. Chin prompted in our first session. For the first time, I shared the full history without minimizing or making excuses. I described the childhood of being secondary to Matthew, the pattern of missed events and diminished achievements, the dismissal of my illness as exaggeration, and finally, the ICU betrayal that had broken the last thread of connection. "What you're describing," Dr. Chin said thoughtfully, "is a classic golden child/scapegoat dynamic. Your brother was cast as the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, whose achievements were celebrated, whose needs were prioritized. You were cast as the scapegoat, the one whose achievements were minimized, whose needs were secondary, whose very experience of reality was questioned." Hearing this pattern named, knowing it was common enough to have terminology, provided unexpected relief. The problem had never been my worth. The roles had been assigned long before I had achievements to celebrate or minimize. "The most important thing to understand," Dr. Chin continued, "is that none of this reflects your actual value. These are roles assigned within a dysfunctional system. Your parents' inability to love you as you deserve says everything about their limitations and nothing about your worthiness. Those words became a mantra in the weeks that followed, repeated silently when doubt crept in during sleepless nights. As my physical strength returned incrementally, I created new boundaries that honored my healing. I changed my phone number, giving it only to people I trusted. I set up email filters that sent my parents' messages to a folder I could check when emotionally prepared, rather than having them ambush me in my inbox. I blocked them on social media, removing their access to the digital window into my life. My design firm allowed me to work remotely during recovery, sending projects I could manage from Jesse's spare room. The familiar creative work provided a sense of normalcy and accomplishment amid the upheaval of everything else. Each completed project reminded me that my value existed independently of my family's recognition. Al, who I'd known primarily as Jesse's boyfriend before my hospitalization, revealed himself to be a quiet but steadfast support. He built a standing desk that fit in the corner of the spare room, allowing me to work comfortably without straining my still-recovering body. He brought dinner from my favorite Thai restaurant when I had enough appetite to enjoy it. His steady presence offered a new model of how men could show care, not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through consistent, thoughtful actions. 6 weeks after the ICU, I experienced my first major health setback, a small flare triggered by overexertion as I tried to resume normal activities too quickly. The sudden return of fever and joint pain sparked momentary panic, memories of the ICU looming large. But this time, I had new emergency contacts in my phone. This time, I knew what early intervention looked like. This time, I didn't downplay symptoms to avoid being labeled dramatic. Jesse drove me to urgent care, where 4 fluids and adjusted medications prevented escalation to hospitalization. The doctor reviewed my records, asking pointed questions about my support system for recovery. "I have people who show up," I told her simply. "Good people." She nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. That's the best medicine I can't prescribe. As October turned to November, the approach of Thanksgiving brought new emotional terrain to navigate. My first major holiday without family contact loomed as both liberation and loss. Jessie solved this dilemma by extending an invitation from her parents. "Mom said to tell you there's a place at the table with your name on it," she informed me casually one evening. "Dad's smoking a turkey and a ham because he can never decide which is better. Fair warning, my sister's kids are loud and my grandmother will ask inappropriate questions about your love life." The simple inclusion, being wanted at someone else's family table, brought unexpected tears. "Are you sure they won't mind?" "I'm not actually family." Jessie looked at me steadily. "Liv, after what we went through in that hospital, you're family in every way that matters. Besides, Mom's been looking for someone to appreciate her cranberry relish recipe. The rest of us hate it." 2 months after my discharge, my parents discovered my workplace and sent an emotional email to my company address, the one account I couldn't filter since I needed it for professional communication. The message was lengthy, full of declarations of love and concern, complaints about my cruelty in cutting contact, and demands for reconciliation. Reading it sent me spiraling into anxiety that triggered another small flare, demonstrating how deeply the emotional wounds affected my physical health. Dr. Chin helped me craft a limited response with firm boundaries. "I am safe and recovering. I am not ready for contact beyond this message. I will reach out when and if I feel able to rebuild communication. Please respect this boundary as a necessary part of my healing." The reply came within minutes, pages of justifications, explanations of why they'd made the choices they had, insistence that I was overreacting. Dr. Chin helped me see these not as reasonable arguments, but as attempts to re-establish the old dynamic where my reality could be dismissed and their narrative could dominate. I did not respond again, choosing instead to focus on rebuilding my life without the constant seeking of approval that had defined it for so long. December brought another significant step, moving into my own apartment in the same building as Jesse and Elle. The proximity maintained my support system while allowing me to reclaim independence as my health stabilized. My new space became a physical manifestation of my emotional transformation, filled with art I loved rather than what might impress others, arranged for my comfort rather than for appearances, a sanctuary rather than a showcase. I painted one wall the bright turquoise my mother had always called garish and hung a gallery of my own photography that had previously been stored in portfolios. As winter settled over Chicago, I began writing about my experiences, first in private journals, then in a blog about chronic illness and family dynamics. The first post, titled "When Those Who Should Care Don't," Navigating Health Crises Alone, received comments from dozens of others with similar experiences. Their responses revealed a community I hadn't known existed, people navigating both chronic conditions and the complicated grief of family who couldn't or wouldn't provide adequate support. One commenter wrote, "Reading this was like finding words for an experience I've never been able to explain to others. Thank you for making me feel less alone in this." That comment led to another post, then another. The blog became both therapeutic outlet and unexpected connection to others walking similar paths. With each shared story, the shame I'd carried, the belief that I must be fundamentally unlovable if my own parents couldn't prioritize me, diminished further. 3 months after the ICU, I received an unexpected email from Matthew. Unlike our parents' messages, his was brief and uncharacteristically reflective. "Olivia, I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the hospital. About a lot of things, actually. I'm starting to see some patterns I never noticed before. Vanessa pointed out some stuff that made me uncomfortable, but she's probably right. I don't know if you want to hear from me at all, but if you do, maybe we could talk sometime. No pressure. Matt." The use of Matt rather than Matthew struck me as significant. Our parents had always insisted on his full name, considering the nickname too common for their golden child. This small rebellion suggested changes I couldn't yet fully assess. I saved the email to consider when I felt stronger. The bridge to my brother, unlike the one to my parents, wasn't necessarily burned beyond repair. But any reconstruction would happen on new terms, with clear-eyed recognition of the dynamics that had shaped us both. As winter gave way to early spring, my physical health stabilized into a new normal, not cured, as lupus never would be, but managed with greater attention and care than I'd given it before. My emotional health, too, found a more stable foundation as I learned to validate my own experiences rather than seeking external confirmation of their reality. 3 months after leaving the hospital bed empty, I was finally filling my own life in ways I'd never imagined possible, with boundaries that protected, relationships that nourished, work that fulfilled, and a growing sense that my worth had never been determined by my family's ability to recognize it. 6 months after that fateful night in the ICU, spring had fully transformed Chicago. The lakefront path bloomed with flowers, and my life had similarly blossomed into something I barely recognized, something stronger, more authentic, and deeply rooted in self-respect. My physical health had stabilized under a new treatment protocol developed with a rheumatologist who specialized in lupus. We'd found medications that managed symptoms without debilitating side effects. I'd learned to honor my body's signals rather than pushing through pain to prove I wasn't being dramatic. Regular yoga, gentle nutrition, and adequate rest became non-negotiable aspects of my routine, acts of self-care rather than self-indulgence. My career had not just recovered but thrived. The perspective gained through near-death clarified my creative vision and priorities. I'd been promoted to art director, leading a team of 5 designers on campaigns that reflected my newly authentic voice. My colleagues remarked on the transformation in my work, bolder, more distinct, less concerned with universal approval. Most significantly, I'd built a circle of chosen family who provided the support my biological relatives never had. Jesse and Al remained my closest friends, but the circle had expanded to include coworkers, neighbors, support group members, and blog readers who became real-life connections. Weekly dinner gatherings in my apartment featured mismatched chairs pulled from various homes, eclectic potluck contributions, and conversations that flowed until midnight. I'd never laughed so freely or felt so genuinely seen. Throughout these months of transformation, my parents had continued their attempts at contact, flowers delivered to my workplace, letters sent to my old address and forwarded, even appearing unannounced at my apartment building, though security, briefed on the situation, had not allowed them up. Each attempt carried the implicit expectation that I would eventually return to the fold, that my rebellion would run its course. After considerable thought and many therapy sessions, I finally agreed to meet them at a neutral location, a cafe 3 blocks from my apartment, with Jesse seated nearby as both witness and support. The meeting had required careful preparation, including specific terms I'd emailed in advance. The conversation would last exactly 1 hour. Any attempt to minimize my experience would end the meeting immediately. No discussion of returning to normal would be permitted since that normal had been deeply dysfunctional. They arrived exactly on time, both looking older than I remembered. My mother had lost weight, her designer clothes hanging slightly loose on her frame. My father's hair showed more gray at the temples. They approached my table hesitantly, as if unsure of the protocol for greeting a daughter who had removed herself from their lives. "Olivia," my mother said, her voice catching slightly. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied, gesturing to the chairs across from me. "Please sit." The conversation that followed revealed the mixed capacity for growth that characterized most human relationships. There were moments of what seemed like genuine remorse, my father acknowledging that the ICU incident represented a terrible lapse in judgment, and my mother admitting through tears that she'd been replaying that night for months, wishing we'd made a different choice. Yet these glimpses of insight frequently gave way to old patterns, attempts to minimize. We did come to the hospital earlier that day, deflect blame. The doctors didn't make it clear how serious it was or suggest shared responsibility. If you'd told us directly how bad you felt instead of having Jesse call. Each time, I calmly restated my boundary until they redirected. "I'm not here to debate what happened," I explained. "I'm here to establish whether we can build a new relationship with different expectations and boundaries." The old relationship nearly killed me, not just physically, but emotionally over many years. "We've always loved you," my mother insisted, reaching for my hand across the table. I kept my hands in my lap. "You loved me in the way you were capable of. But that love came with conditions that were harmful to me. I needed to be seen, valued, and prioritized equally to Matthew. That never happened." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We never meant to make you feel less important. Impact matters more than intent," I replied, echoing Dr. Chen's words. "And the impact of your choices was that I spent my life feeling invisible and unworthy." The hour passed quickly, establishing tentative parameters for what might come next. Monthly phone calls with clear time limits, no unannounced visits, respect for my health needs without questioning their validity, and no pressure to attend family events that felt unsafe emotionally. As we prepared to part, my mother asked tearfully, "Will you ever forgive us?" The question wasn't unexpected, but my answer surprised even me. "I already have forgiven you, in the sense that I don't carry anger anymore. It was too heavy." But forgiveness doesn't mean returning to a situation that caused harm. It means I've released the expectation that you could have been different than you were. Now I'm creating a life that honors what I need, whether or not you can provide it. They left looking shaken but thoughtful. Whether lasting change would come remained to be seen, but my well-being no longer depended on their transformation. A week after this meeting, I received an email from Matthew, not the first since his initial reach out, but the most substantive. He requested his own meeting, separate from our parents. "There are things I'm starting to understand about our family that I need to talk about," he wrote. "Things I was blind to for a long time." Our meeting at a lakefront park revealed a brother I barely recognized, humbled, reflective, and increasingly aware of how the family dynamics had shaped us both. "Vanessa has been pointing things out since we got married," he explained, watching sailboats drift across the harbor. When I told her what happened at the hospital, she was horrified. She kept asking questions about our childhood that I couldn't answer, like had Mom and Dad ever missed my events the way they missed yours? And I realized they never had, not once. He described his growing recognition of the role he'd unconsciously played in the family system. "I didn't create the golden child dynamic, but I benefited from it and never questioned it. I'm sorry, Olivia. I should have seen what was happening to you." His apology, unlike our parents, came without qualifications or expectations. He didn't ask for immediate closeness or for me to let go of boundaries. Instead, he simply acknowledged the reality I'd lived with and his own complicity in it. "Vanessa's been good for me," he added. "She calls me out when I fall into old family patterns. She's helping me learn how to be different than what I was raised to be." This conversation marked the beginning of a slowly rebuilding relationship with my brother, not the instantaneous closeness of movie reconciliations, but a gradual, authentic connection based on mutual respect rather than assigned family roles. 3 weeks later, I agreed to attend dinner at my parents' home, the first time I'd entered that space since my hospitalization. I brought Jesse for support and established a clear departure time in advance. The evening progressed reasonably well until dessert, when my mother began questioning whether I was still claiming that job stress affects your lupus symptoms. Without drama or a lengthy explanation, I stood, thanked them for dinner, and left, a simple enforcement of the boundary I'd established. My phone rang repeatedly during the drive home, but I didn't answer. The next day, I sent a brief email. "Last night was an example of the dismissal of my health experiences that I can no longer accept. We can try again in 2 weeks if you're willing to respect that boundary." My mother's reply came hours later, the first acknowledgement of wrongdoing without qualification. "You're right. I fell back into old habits. I'm sorry and we'll do better next time." It was a small step, but significant in its simplicity and lack of defensiveness. As the 1-year anniversary of my ICU stay approached, I found myself reflecting on how near death had paradoxically brought me more fully into life. The journey hadn't been linear. Some days still brought grief for the family relationships I'd wished for, anger at the decades spent seeking approval that never came, or exhaustion from maintaining boundaries that shouldn't have been necessary. Dr. Chin helped me recognize that healing isn't a destination, but a continuing process. "Some days will be harder than others," she reminded me. "The goal isn't to never feel pain about your family history, but to build a life rich enough that the pain doesn't define you." On the exact anniversary of the night my parents chose Matthew's party over my hospital bed, I gathered my chosen family in my apartment, not to commemorate illness, but to celebrate rebirth. Jesse had dubbed it my Phoenix Day, marking the moment I'd risen from the ashes of both physical crisis and emotional destruction. During the celebration, I excused myself briefly to my bedroom, where I took out the letter I'd written to my family from the hospital bed a year earlier. Its words captured the raw pain and determination of that moment, but they belonged to a past version of myself. In its place, I wrote a new letter, this one to myself, promising continued self-respect, boundaries that protected without isolating, and the courage to keep building a life aligned with my authentic needs and values. The lessons of the past year had transformed me in ways both visible and invisible. I'd learned that crisis reveals people's true priorities. When someone shows you where you stand in their life through their actions, believe them the first time. I discovered that boundaries aren't punishment, but protection, creating space for relationships that can be healthy while limiting those that cause harm. I'd found that chosen family can be stronger than biological bonds, built on mutual care rather than obligation. I'd realized that nearly losing everything, health, family connections, old identities, had helped me find myself in deeper, more authentic ways. I'd come to understand that forgiveness is possible without forgetting, that releasing anger doesn't require returning to harmful situations. Most importantly, I'd learned that my worth had never been determined by others' ability to see it. The validation I'd sought externally had always existed within, waiting for me to claim it. As I rejoined my friends in the living room, their laughter and conversation wrapping around me like a blanket, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for 28 years. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, nor would it always be smooth. But for perhaps the first time, I was walking it as my full self, seen, valued, and deeply connected to people who showed up when it mattered most. What about you? Have you ever had to create boundaries with family to protect your well-being? Or found yourself building a chosen family that provided what your biological one couldn't? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that their worth isn't defined by others' ability to recognize it. Thank you for witnessing my journey, and remember, sometimes the empty hospital bed isn't an ending, but the first page of a better story.